Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and currently of Sports Info Solutions, joined as always by Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. Aaron, for a little while the other night, I thought we might see Pat Mahomes coming back down to earth, but he was absolutely ridiculous in the second half. We have the 4-0 Chiefs. Tell me, what are your thoughts on young Patrick Mahomes?
He's been fabulous. I mean, he's been everything everybody said he was going to be. I do think there's a little bit of people are kind of rewriting the past a little bit. I don't think anybody could say that they would have expected him to be this good. There's just too much unsureness about young quarterbacks when they get their first significant playing time. Nobody can promise that a guy's going to be this good. Frankly, nobody can promise that a guy's going to be as horrible as Josh Allen's been either. There's just too much variation. But he's been phenomenal. He's been absolutely phenomenal.
Right. We don't know that much. I noticed last week the Chiefs had, one of the top starts in DVOA history. Has that persisted through?
I mean, they weren't quite as good on offense against Denver, mostly because the first half of the game. So they're no longer one of the top 10 offenses we've ever tracked through 4 weeks. Now they're one of the top 20 offenses we've ever tracked. And again, that's normalized for the extreme offensive levels of this season. I think that if you don't normalize for the offensive level of the season, the 2018 Rams and Chiefs might be among the 2 or 3 best offenses ever, because just offensive levels are so high now in general, and then those two offenses are so far above the rest of the league right now. It's a little insane.
Yeah, it's been predictable, but even like in the amount that it's actually that we've seen it come to pass, it's been something else.
And last year there was this dip. Right. Last year, there was a little bit of a dip in a lot of the trends having to do with offense. And so we were sort of thinking, has the whole offensive rise in the NFL slowed down? Or is this a little bit of a fluke, maybe partially caused by all the injuries among top quarterbacks last year? Yeah, it looks like a fluke in 2017 because the rise of offensive levels has picked up from where it left off in 2016 and gone even further.
So Mahomes also reminds me a little bit of Deshaun Watson last year. Deshaun Watson bursts on the scene, similar playing style, just ridiculous efficiency numbers that we really hadn't seen. And then, Houston couldn't move the ball at all without him. And we look at this year, Pat Mahomes, 4-0, looking good. Hopefully he won't get injured in that same way. But it does make me wonder about sustainability. Watson, for what it's worth, had a kind of rough opening game to the season, but he's been very good since then.
Yeah, Derek Klassen actually wrote today in Film Room on Football Outsiders, if people want to go check it out, about Watson actually, from a film perspective, looking improved from last year. He has no protection whatsoever. One of the things is Mahomes is getting great protection on top of everything else.
So I want to dive a little bit deeper in on the Mahomes stuff because Bryce Rossler did some excellent research as usual. And what he was talking about was a lot of people are making a big deal about Mahomes' superior arm talent and how that's played into the Kansas City offense. And I think that certainly passed the eyeball test. But what they've really done is not that they've been throwing deeper so much more often, it's that they're throwing short so much less often. So it's been those behind the line of scrimmage to 5 yards downfield throws where their offense has really changed this year. Alex Smith last year, 57% of his throws were behind 5 yards downfield. That's down 10% to 47% for Mahomes, and we see corresponding upticks all over the field. Now, like when we were talking about Fitzpatrick and Jameis Winston, a little bit surprisingly, it hasn't been the 20 or more yards downfield throws where Mahomes has been the difference maker. It's been the 11 to 19 yard range. So overall, in terms of expected points per play, Mahomes is tripling where Alex Smith was over the course of last season. And he's also tripling him in that 11 to 19 yard range. In the 20-plus yard range, Alex Smith actually had a higher expected points per play than Mahomes does this year. So another situation where you're thinking about all these deep balls, but it's really been that intermediate range where we've seen Mahomes be a difference maker.
Yeah, I'll say another thing interesting about Mahomes is that they don't use him very much under center. Kansas City uses shotgun 83% of the time, which is second in the NFL. Kansas City's DVOA is the first in the league under shotgun. It's actually 23rd in the league when Mahomes is under center, but they just don't do that very much. So it doesn't matter that they're not that successful in those situations.
So we saw the three-pointer just grow and grow and grow in the NBA, and shotgun is one of those things in the NFL where it's more efficient than not shotgun on average. Just like passing is more efficient than running on average. Just like jet sweep play actions are more efficient than not having a jet sweep motion guy on average. There are all these different little things that we're seeing across the NFL this year where you're starting to see teams realizing that, hey, this is more efficient when we do it this way. Let's do it that way more often.
Right. And at some point it should balance, but we're not at that point yet. So for crying out loud, use more of this stuff.
Yeah, let's enjoy it. A couple more notes on Patrick Mahomes. Teams are actually playing him with much less cover one and much more cover three than we saw last year. Cover one is down 19% from last year for Chiefs opponents, and cover three is up 11%. This relates to Keegan Abdu's research that he did on Lamar Jackson that came out on footballoutsiders.com. Mobile quarterbacks are tough to defend with man schemes. It gives them the ability to pull it down and run and to be able to outrun the guy who's usually designated as the spy. So we're seeing a lot of cover three against Patrick Mahomes, and it's really changed the way that teams are playing the Chiefs, and it limits a little bit of what they can do defensively that Mahomes is so mobile there.
We haven't even really seen him use his mobility. Kansas City has had 4 scrambles so far, right? This isn't like Houston. Deshaun Watson has scrambled 17 times past the line of scrimmage. Mahomes has scrambled 4 times. So we haven't even seen him use that mobility really to the best of his ability yet.
Yeah, it's kind of scary to think about if that really comes to be more into play. And as teams are sitting back in the cover three, you understand why he's hanging in the pocket and doing his thing. But really, getting rid of all these short 1 yard, 2 yard passes behind the line of scrimmage passes and replacing them with these 6 to 19 yard range passes, I think is what's made the difference. We look with their main targets, Tyreek Hill and Jason Kelce. Last year, Kelce, 48% of targets less than 5 yards downfield. That's down 10% this year. Even more stark for Hill. 46% of his targets were less than 5 yards downfield last year. That's down to 31% this year, 15% decrease. And then you look at those deep throws and how it relates there by changing the kind of percentages that you're throwing to the different levels. Hill's expected points average per target, 20 or more yards downfield, is actually split in half this year. He's been much less effective per play this year when targeted downhill. But again, that goes back to they're seeing a lot of cover three. They're seeing a lot of teams really protect the back end against Patrick Mahomes. So I'm looking for the Chiefs to implement more and more of the air raid concepts. Bryce and I had a great discussion about this. The air raid is really designed to break the cover three with all of the 4 vertical concepts. And so where the Chiefs offense continues to evolve over the course of the season is really promising.
Yeah, it's going to be really good. One thing that may bring them back to earth right now, Kansas City is the number 1 offense passing on 3rd and 4th down, and their DVOA is twice as high as any other offense. And that's likely not completely sustainable. But, you know, if they're only the best offense and not the best offense by twice as much as any other offense, I still think that's pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's take a look back at the 3 games that we highlighted from last week and see what we thought of those as they played out. Up first on the schedule last week, we talked about Baltimore. They had a nice victory over Pittsburgh. Now they're 3-1. Pittsburgh at 1-2-1. Is Pittsburgh in trouble, and are the Ravens a contender?
Pittsburgh is absolutely in trouble because they're now 1.5 games behind both Baltimore and Cincinnati. And Baltimore's a contender, and I thought Baltimore was a contender before the season started because their defense is always really good and their special teams are always really good. The thing this year so far, the offense has been much better. The passing game has been much better than it was last year. And the special teams haven't showed up yet. Other than Justin Tucker, the rest of their special teams have actually been below average. So once the special teams probably play the way we expect Baltimore special teams to play, that's going to be just another big bonus for them. The question is, can they keep the passing game going the way it's been going? Because this is much more efficient than Flacco has been for the last couple of years.
Yeah, we've really seen a resurgence in Flacco. We talked about the presence of Lamar Jackson kind of spurring him on potentially, and also the speed that they've added at the wide receiver position this year has really made a difference. I think this is a huge victory for Baltimore. The separation of the division from Pittsburgh right here, and now they're getting Jimmy Smith back. Things really could start to develop really nicely for them this year. Pittsburgh, I don't think it's over because I think the AFC is weak enough that they can still kind of hang around. It's just 2 losses that they have right now. But things start to get really dire, as we will circle back on later in the podcast. The second game we talked about last week, Chicago being movable force, or what was it? The immovable object?
I said the Chicago offense against the Tampa Bay defense was the resistible force versus the movable object. And the object was much, much, much more movable than the force was resistible, because that object got moved all around the field for the entire game. Highest single game DVOA of the year, 107% for Chicago. So that Tampa Bay defense is horrendous. And I'd like to see Trubisky do this against another defense before I really start believing in him. But for one game, they were outstanding in pretty much every way, spread the ball around to all the receivers. Everything they wanted to do on offense.
Yeah, I think people probably are going a little bit too far. I know 6 touchdowns is a lot, but you hear Trubisky's the truth. Everything's right in that world. I'm with you. I want to see him do it more than once against a really, really bad pass defense before I jump back in. The other side of things, we saw Fitzpatrick come in and not play well, a few interceptions. In the second half, Winston came in and he had 2 interceptions against most of the Chicago backups. The story there is it really didn't matter who was playing. Chicago, number 1 in defensive DVOA right now. Khalil Mack, just out of his mind, defensive player of the month. They were no match regardless of who was playing quarterback. What do we think going forward, though? We're seeing Winston come in now. I think it makes sense to kind of both of us. And I've heard a little bit of people saying maybe they're pulling the leash on Fitz too quickly, or this was always going to happen. This is inevitable. Of course, they're doing this right now.
Yeah, I think this was always going to happen. This was inevitable. It's why I was a big fan of Jameis Winston in fantasy this year. I think he's going to pile up big numbers. It may not be that efficient, but it's going to be big numbers. They've still got they still have the targets to go deep with. They still have really good receivers. And with that defense being so poor, they're going to have to be passing the ball a lot in games to try to keep up with the number of points that their defense gives up.
Yeah, I was sad to see O.J. Howard go down. I think the offense will miss him a little bit, but overall, the weapons are incredible. I'm with you from a fantasy perspective. Jameis is an air yards guy, and really, we're all back to normal there. And speaking of back to normal, the Patriots annihilated the Miami Dolphins. We do not have to consider any conspiracy theories. The AFC East is just as it's been for the last 18 years or so.
Yeah, where Miami, whatever they were doing in the first 3 weeks of the season disappeared. The stronger run defense, they were just giving up colossal holes in the running game. Even Xavier Howard, who's been phenomenal this year, gave up a touchdown in coverage to Philip Dorsett. Everything went wrong for Miami in one game that had gone right for the first 3 games. It's interesting. Miami, they really did it with defense in the first 2 games. Then they did it with offense in the third game against the Raiders, and then they did nothing against the Patriots.
Right. And, it was sort of a Murphy's Law day, but it doesn't help Murphy's Law when you're doing crazy things like having second and forever and choosing to run it and then throw a bubble screen just to complicate things and make matters worse. I noticed that we tweeted about that at the exact same time. I mean, you almost feel bad for Tannehill out there. Not that I'm a big fan of his throughout his career, but he didn't really have a chance to do much of anything there. For a lot of the game, it seemed like he was just dropping back and holding the ball. Either nobody was open or he didn't know where to go with it. But really never even a close game there. And I see that the Dolphins are still high up on the DVOA ranks.
Because of the first 3 games. They had a minus 64% for this game. But they're rated so high because of their first 3 games that they're still at 6th for this season only. I think the system is definitely overrating them. There's some issues where when you have a game where, because it's an efficiency system, you run into a problem when you have a team that's super duper efficient but doesn't hold on to the ball. When a team has a game where it's either 3 and outs or long touchdowns, that comes out as efficient. But because you're not holding on to the ball with the 3 and outs, the game ends up a lot closer. And that's the way their game against the Raiders ended up. They had 9.6 yards per play in that game with no turnovers. Those are just sick numbers. but they also ran only half as many plays as the Raiders. So it's a little bit of a deficiency with the system that I think is overrating Miami.
We'll circle back on that because I have a question for you about opponent adjustments. But right now, let's take a quick break to hear about the SIS Data Hub. The Off the Charts Football Podcast is brought to you by the Sports Info Solutions Data Hub, located at sisdatahub.com. The SIS Data Hub is an interactive tool that allows you to tap into the vast Sports Info Solutions database to find answers to almost any question imaginable. Want to know which quarterback performs the strongest in 11 personnel against man coverage while under pressure in the fourth quarter of a one-possession game? Answers are just a few clicks away at sisdatahub.com. The SIS Data Hub is also the only place to view exclusive proprietary statistics like points added, positive play percentage, and independent quarterback rating. By combining this with the ability for the user to add an unlimited number of filters based on SIS charting data, the Data Hub is a trusted tool for coaches, scouts, and the media, and it could be yours too. Right now, for a limited time, you can get a free 1-week trial to this revolutionary database when you go to sisdatahub.com and register for an account. That's sisdatahub.com. All right, and coming right back in, we want to talk about the biggest games this week in terms of playoff probability. Aaron, what is the first most important game of the week?
Sticking with the Miami Dolphins. And again, we talk about how we feel our system may have Miami too high, but it still comes out with Cincinnati and Miami as the biggest game of the week for playoff probabilities. 71% of the time, Cincinnati makes the playoffs with a win, 47% with a loss. Miami, 80% with a win, 57% for a loss. This is kind of the who is for real game with these two teams that nobody really expected to be major contenders, both starting at 3-1. Whoever wins this game is at 4-1 and looking really good.
So who is for real? Andy Dalton versus Ryan Tannehill. I am leaving the room before I have to answer that question.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think Andy Dalton is who he is and Ryan Tannehill is who he is. I mean, they're both. Yeah, their peak is average. Their peak is average NFL quarterback. Tannehill's just like a little bit of a more mobile version of Dalton. I think the test for who is for real here is about the defenses, right? Rather than the offenses. And Miami has been a much better defense so far this year. They're 7th in DVOA so far this year. Cincinnati is 23rd. So is Miami really that defense, or are they the defense that we saw against the Patriots, which just got sliced and diced, especially on the ground? I think that's the real test for them in this game because Tannehill is who we know he is.
Right. We saw Brady go into that game and call a lot of plays at the line of scrimmage. It seemed like he was choosing, 2 plays called, 1 to each side, choosing the play at the line based on something they were seeing in the alignment of Miami up front. And Miami never really shored that up. That continued to be unsound throughout the game. We'll see if they can correct that or if that continues to be an issue going forward. I wanted to ask you before about opponent adjustments because I know in the DVOA ratings, those were added in this week. And I think the Bengals still were at number 7. And you noted that they had a top 10 schedule. Miami's at number 6. Where does their schedule stack up so far?
Right. Now, because of the fact that the opponent adjustments are not at full strength, you still end up with most of the top teams come out with easy schedules because that's the effect of those teams playing well for their opponents. It's only 4 games. Most of the worst teams come out with hard schedules. So Cincinnati really is an exception. But Miami's schedule so far has ranked 19th. Cincinnati's schedule so far, like you said, 9th. It's the only team in the top 10 with a top 10 schedule. Miami's schedule also gets a lot easier from here on out. Cincinnati's schedule does not get easier. It's still a top 10 schedule. If you look at our Dave ratings, which account for preseason projections and thus have Pittsburgh a little higher, Cincinnati's remaining schedule is still a top 10 schedule.
Very interesting. Taking a little bit of a deeper look at Andy Dalton, I wanted to explore what you talked about also in terms of him being kind of average. And I think what the Bengals have done kind of admirably with Andy Dalton throughout his career is tried to build around him, realizing that he's a guy that they can win with, but not a guy that they're going to win because of. He's not going to be Russell Wilson. He's not going to be Aaron Rodgers, but he's a guy that they can win with. And this year, you've seen the weapons around him and strengthening that offensive line a little bit again after a definite down year last year. And Dalton's actually been able to create a lot of offense. So he's seventh in the NFL amongst quarterbacks with 29 expected points added through 4 games. On the other side of things, he's also sixth in interception percentage. So on the other side of that, the Dolphins secondary leads the NFL with 9 interceptions, and they allow a quarterback rating of just 72, which is second in the NFL. I think the thing that I'm looking at here to bail Dalton out is his great weapons. 4 receivers are averaging over 9 yards per target with a rating above 100 when targeted. We all know A.J. Green. He has 5 touchdowns already this year. But Tyler Boyd has been a guy that's really emerged this season. He's a guy that I loved coming out of Pitt, and he struggled for the beginning of his career. But he's really come out, leads the Bengals in targets, receptions, and yards, and he's second in the NFL amongst wide receivers in total points, our division of credit of expected points measure. So Tyler Boyd has been a guy that's really jumped on the scene this year, and I think he's here to stay. I think he's legit.
Yeah, and who they go to with Miami, their defense really depends on sides because Xavier Howard is so good. Cordray Tankersley, I believe, is the cornerback on the other side, but Miami is the number 1 defense in the league against wide receiver 1 in DVOA, but it honestly doesn't really matter because the issue here is not who's wide receiver 1, but who's on the left and the right. Miami is number 4 against passes to the left side. That's Howard. They're 21st against passes to the right side. That's Tankersley. So whether it's Boyd or Green, whoever's on that right side, and I mean, if they can put them both on that right side and figure out a way to have another receiver on the left, keep Howard on the left, then they're going to have open guys.
Absolutely. Love the strategy there. And I think it bodes well for them if they continue to get those matchups with Xavier Howard isolated on garbage. Let's look ahead. The second most important game of the week. What do we have there?
New Orleans and Washington. New Orleans is in 76% of the time with a win, 54% with a loss. Washington, 70% with a win, 48% with a loss. The really interesting thing here is that this game pits 2 very different defenses against each other. Right now, Washington is 3rd against the pass, 31st against the run. New Orleans, dead last against the pass, number 1 against the run.
I think that in the passing league that it is the NFL right now, I'm looking at this game as the passing matchup. So the Saints passing game, absolutely outrageous, as we know. But the Redskins pass defense has been really good. They're 3rd in the NFL with a 77 quarterback rating against. We talked a little bit last week. Is it the Redskins scheme? Is it their pass rush? What is it that's propelling their passing game? What are your thoughts there?
I think it's interesting because last year they led the league in pressure rate. This year, I don't think they're near the top in pressure rate. They're getting great coverage, and from guys that no one's heard of, like Fabian Moreau and Quentin Dunbar. If you take out sacks and passes with no intended receiver, they're the number 1 pass defense by DVOA. Now, here's interesting is they're top 5 against both wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2. They're 24th against other wide receivers. They're not allowing a lot of passes to other wide receivers, but efficiency-wise, they haven't been as good. So I wonder whether this might be the Cameron Meredith breakout game.
Very interesting there. We know that Breeze can spray it around and share the wealth. Then when Washington has the ball, we look at the Saints pass defense and how much they've struggled. The Saints play zone coverage at the 4th highest rate in the NFL, 63%. And Alex Smith has struggled a little bit against the zone. His IQR at just 83. Smith has only attempted 3 throws that traveled 10 or more yards downfield against zone coverage. Really, really interesting there. One guy that we can expect him to go after, Ken Crawley, ranks last in the NFL out of 156 corners with negative 19 points saved on a minimum of 10 targets. So costing his team a lot of points right there in the passing game. All right, let's move forward to the third game. We have the third most important game of the week in terms of playoff odds. What do we have, Aaron?
Minnesota and Philadelphia. Another matchup of 2 teams that are trying to get back into the playoff race after slower starts. Minnesota in 36% of the time with a win, 16% with a loss. Philadelphia 50% with a win, 28% with a loss.
Yeah, I look at this game and seeing the records of these two teams, each with 2 losses at this point in the season, it makes me, I would have been shocked if you had told me that before the season started, that we'd be here, even with Foles starting the season for Philadelphia. And with Minnesota, they've made the change at quarterback, which really hasn't been the problem at all for them. They've probably seen improved quarterback play, if anything, but they've fallen apart in other areas of their team.
Yeah, Minnesota is right now struggling on defense, which I don't think anybody ever would have expected, given the amount of talented players on that defense. I mean, they're getting pass rush, but the coverage has been poor. It's amazing the way everybody's been able to scheme. The Rams especially scheme their wide receivers up against Anthony Barr. Like, I don't blame Anthony Barr for not being able to cover wide receivers all the time because he's a linebacker and that's not usually his job. But the Rams figured out that the Minnesota was going to check to cover 3, and they were going to just run 4 verts against it, and Woods would get open, that one play. And overall, the defense has just been a real problem for Minnesota, both against the run and the pass.
Yeah, I had a little Twitter exchange earlier in the week because somebody pointed out that play to me and said they were forced to check into the cover 3. And my opinion there is whenever you've got 4 vertical threats on the line of scrimmage, and in this case they had 5, you really don't want to be in cover 3. That's what I was taught back to when I was coaching in the high school football level. So maybe there's some stuff that's going on that's above my pay grade here in terms of what's happening schematically. But regardless of the personnel group, I thought it was a bizarre choice. I'd rather be in a single high man. I'd rather be in a cover 2 or 2-man. Really, you want to keep 2 high safeties in general whenever you're facing the possibility of the 4 vertical routes. But I digress. I think the thing that saved the Vikings here is they like to play man coverage. They play man third most in the league. They play it 2/3 of the time. And Carson Wentz has actually struggled against man this year. Could be small sample size, but there could be something to make there. He's 30th out of 33 qualifying quarterbacks in yards per attempt against man, just 5.2 yards per attempt. His IQR is down at 60. Unrelated to the game, Jared Goff, he currently has a perfect IQR against man, for comparison's sake there. Now, on the other side of the ball, I'm looking at the Eagles. They rank second in the NFL in pressures, but that might not be such a great thing for them matchup-wise because Kirk Cousins has been unbothered by pressure. He ranks 6th in IQR while under pressure and 2nd in terms of on-target pass percentage. So a couple of matchup things there that I think play well for Minnesota.
The one thing I will say is that research has shown that performance by most quarterbacks under pressure is much more variable than performance not under pressure. So I don't know, the fact that he's been really good under pressure so far this year, I don't know if that's going to remain that way. There are some quarterbacks who seem to be really good under pressure consistently year after year, like Russell Wilson consistently year after year is one of the top quarterbacks against pressure. I don't think Cousins is one of those guys.
All right, and let's move on to our one bonus game that we're going to talk about this week. This is the one that you call the last chance game, as in the last chance for the teams to right the ship. Who do we have?
Yeah, Pittsburgh and Atlanta. 1-3 Atlanta, 1-2-1 Pittsburgh. Atlanta makes the playoffs 26% of the time with a win, only 12% with a loss. Pittsburgh 30% with a win, 13% with a loss. These are two teams that have really disappointed so far. The Atlanta offense is not disappointed. The Atlanta offense is still top 10, but their defense has been really bad. And Pittsburgh has just been sort of really mediocre all around.
Yeah, I'm with you. The defense has struggled. And Atlanta offensively, I think teams are still kind of sleeping on just how well Matt Ryan's played. Throw Phillip Rivers in that category too. Matt Ryan and Phillip Rivers, I think, are playing better football than people are realizing or giving them credit for. One thing I noticed from your column this week is that Atlanta's schedule gets easier from here on out. And that bodes well for them in terms of if they can figure out some things on that defensive side of the ball. But it's really tough to imagine them making a run in that difficult NFC, especially if they can't take this game against Pittsburgh.
Yeah, these teams, if they lose this game, they're pretty out of it at this point. And not as much. It is a cross-conference game, so if we come down to tiebreakers, it won't be as important, although the fact is Pittsburgh's probably not going to come down to tiebreakers at all because they have the tie in their record. But I think with Pittsburgh, there's a lot of talk about missing Le'Veon Bell. But the biggest issue for this team has been what is going on with Antonio Brown and the relationship between Roethlisberger and Brown. Because Brown has a catch rate of 55%, which would be a career low. He's been at like 62 and 68% the last couple of years. And he's down to 9.4 yards a reception after a career average of 13.4 yards per reception. He's not getting the downfield stuff. They're kind of like feeding him screens sometime, which I'm not a big fan of feeding Antonio Brown screens, but they're not getting the downfield stuff to him.
My take there is that Le'Veon Bell did a lot to dictate the type of coverages that you can run, the type of personnel that you can even put on the field as a defense. And it's making it easier for teams to match up with Antonio Brown. People, like to say, oh, look at this. Who's worth $14 million, $17 million a year when James Conner can come in and do it for $500,000? Well, James Conner's not doing everything that Le'Veon Bell did, especially in terms of the way that he shapes the defense. So I look at that and I think that it's not a mystery there. And I also wonder, with all the personal stuff going on in the locker room in Pittsburgh, it's hard to figure out. There might just be something literally within their relationship that's changed.
Yeah, I mean, those are the things that statistics can't tell us about, right? But they do exist. They matter. There's just no way to measure them. And perhaps there is something to that there. I will say it's interesting. James Conner should play a big role in this game because Atlanta, efficiency-wise, they're actually not that bad against passes to running backs this year. But volume-wise, they give up the most. Like, people just pass to running backs against them constantly. And with missing Deion Jones and missing the two safeties, it's really easy to pass to your running backs against them. And so Connor's got to show that he can be a Le'Veon Bell quality receiver in this game because they're going to need that because that's just how people play against Atlanta.
All right. Well, on that note, we will sign out for this week. I'm going to leave everybody off with one note, some recommended reading. Danny Kelly of The Ringer used SIS data to explain how the jet sweep touch pass, and jet sweep motion has played a role in the explosion of NFL offenses in 2018. Spoiler alert, yards per play on jet sweeps has exploded this year, and jet sweep play fakes are really, really good for the passing game.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? I used to not be a fan of what they call ghost motion when it was a straight end around. It's so much more valuable with the jet sweeps. Defenses seem to follow that much more than they do the old school like fake end around motion.
And one thing that's really interesting that we find is that it's not making a big difference in terms of as a decoy in the run game. It's making a huge difference in terms of play action in the passing game. All right, Aaron, we will talk to you next week. Shout out to our producer, Justin, doing a great job making us sound beautiful. We will talk to you next week. Have a great weekend.